interns and Lauren and other people mentioned that they really liked the talk I gave last year. And they really thought, that it was fantastic and inspiring and all of these things, which made me get scared and also set the bar very high. So you can just throw that out. Also, I told a long story about how I got involved in this movement. And I wasn't, if there were going to be a lot of repeat people, I didn't want to take a lot of your time by telling my story again, because you already heard me tell it last year, even though you liked it. And they said, no, we really liked it, so please tell it again, please tell it again. And so what I thought I would try to do this year would be to tell a shorter version of that story for those of you who are new, and maybe a refresher for those of you who were here last year, and then include a bunch of other stuff that's in line with the topic I wanted to talk about tonight. But I'm really bad at telling that story as a short story. I even practiced this afternoon real quick, and it wasn't real quick. So, right, yeah. So I figured I'd give it a shot, though. Although there's certainly plenty of other stuff that I could talk about besides my own experiences with this. So, first, hello everyone. Good evening. Welcome to CFI this summer. The title of this session is CFI's Campus Outreach, Past, Present, and Future. And partly that's because we figured you're here for a leadership conference. CFI has been doing the campus outreach program since 1996. But we sometimes joke that campus organizing is like organizing at a bus stop. You get things going, poof, the next year happens, and half of your leadership disappears. They graduate, or they drop out, or they become too busy, or they have kids and they disappear. And we have a whole new crop of people who don't know the history, who haven't been involved before, who need to be trained with leadership, who are new to student groups, who are possibly very new to the movement. And so giving some background as to what's been going on, who's been involved, why we're doing the things we do, and some of the other stuff like that seemed like a very useful and important thing as we get this conference underway. So let's start with the past. CFI's Campus Outreach Past. The standard story is that in 1996, the Council for Secular Humanism brought together 7 students here at CFI. And these students all had groups on their campuses, and they wanted to start a national or international network of these campus groups where students could share resources and communicate with each other about this stuff and get involved in coordinated campaigns. According to the language on our website, which I've read so often now, and it didn't used to totally make sense to me, but now it does much more, it's this. They were concerned by the rising tide of religious political extremism and anti-scientific outlooks among members of their generation. Mind you, this is also in the mid-90s, it hasn't gotten better, as well as the lack of a strong and supportive community for young freethinkers. Also, some of them came from hostile environments, hostile communities, also hostile families who weren't into non-belief, who didn't see that as an alternative. They agreed that there were dangers inherent in the present religious assaults on academic freedom, civil liberties, and scientific literacy. So they outlined their concerns in a declaration of necessity, which they then distributed online. This, by the way, got picked up by things like the New York Times and printed. Within a year, there were 40 campus groups under the banner of what was then called the Campus Free Thought Alliance. In 2004, it changed its name to CFI on Campus. And the reason for that is several-fold. One, it stopped being just under the banner of the Council for Secular Humanism. When it was under the banner of Council, it was more focused on atheism, secularism, and humanism, not as much on the skeptical aspect of things and science advocacy. So they wanted to broaden the mission of the Campus Outreach Program to include that. Therefore, it moved under CFI and changed its name. Secondly, there was also a high school outreach program which started in 1999, which was called the Young Freethinkers Alliance. And that got combined with the Campus Free Thought Alliance into this broader CFI on-campus program. And by the way, when Andrea was joking about how sometimes they've mistyped things like Center for Inquiry as Center for Iniquity, one thing that we joke about on campus is typing it CFI on Camus, which I did today again as well, typing the URL. So it's been around since 1996, and the reason that my story has anything to do with this is because I've actually been involved with the campus outreach program in some way since 2000, and for very interesting reasons. And here's my attempt to tell the shorter version of that story. I was born on a rainy Wednesday in Philadelphia. That is true, actually. So I'm told by my mom, and she was there. So I was born on a Wednesday in Philadelphia. My father is Jewish, was Jewish. My mother was Catholic, raised in a Catholic country. She's an immigrant from Trinidad. And I was baptized as a kid, as were my siblings. And they worked really, really hard to send me and my siblings to Catholic school. The reason for this is that the Philadelphia public school system sucks. It's terrible. Like many school systems in cities, especially old northern cities. In my area, the schools were terrible. There were a lot of problems with crime and violence and assault. And so they worked really hard to send us to Catholic school, which was not as terrible. And I didn't think much of it. Sometimes I went to synagogue with my father. I liked the music a lot. All right, I'm going to leave out details like that. Faster story, faster story. I went to synagogue with my father sometimes, and I did like the music. And sometimes studied Hebrew for fun. And eventually, 6th grade came up. And in 6th and 7th grade, every 2 years in my small school, we went through the sacrament of confirmation, because you're not old enough to say yes when you're baptized generally. So when you're older, like in 6th grade, then you can decide for yourself that you're going to be Catholic forever. And so everyone in school went through this, studied the catechism, chose a sponsor. It was a big thing in school. And I realized I wasn't sure I wanted to do this. I was very into Greek mythology at the time. I was really into the Chronicles of Narnia. I also wondered how I could know that the Catholics were right and the Jews were not. Because when I went to synagogue with my father, they certainly didn't say that the Messiah had come yet. And they seemed to have pretty good reasons for thinking so. You know, he's supposed to bring 1,000 years of peace. That didn't happen with Jesus. All these other unfulfilled prophecies, they said. And so I told my teacher that I wasn't sure I wanted to go through with it. And she said, "What's wrong with you? Of course you are. Everyone is." So I thought I could get out of it by converting to Judaism. So I told my dad that I wanted to convert to Judaism and not to tell Mom. And he said that it was a good time for me to think about that, because if I started now, I could start training for my bat mitzvah. And so I thought I had the choice between these two lifetime religious traditions, these two commitment ceremonies. Either I could be Catholic forever, or I could be Jewish forever. And this was a huge, huge decision for me. So I remember riding my bike around this one weekend, and my teacher at school told me I had to choose a sponsor for confirmation, someone to guide me through the process of becoming really Catholic. And I wasn't sure whether to do that or to tell her that I was now going to be Jewish. And so I was thinking, you know, which God do I believe in more, a Catholic God or a Jewish God? And as I thought about it and how I could evaluate which one was right, I realized that there were other religious traditions. There were other people in my neighborhood. We had Hindus down the street. There was a mosque next to my local 7-Eleven. And how did I know that they weren't right? I barely knew anything about them. How could I evaluate without learning first everything that they believed or something? What if I was going to choose the wrong path? And as I thought about it, and the other stories I'd read, I realized that the stories I was learning in Catholic school, and the stories of the Bible, could be like the stories of Greek mythology 2,000 years ago. And maybe they're all just stories, and maybe there really is no God, and that's why everyone has different stories. And I thought I was the first person in the world to ever think of this. That's actually true because I'd never heard anyone tell me that before. I didn't know that was an option. And I was so excited to tell people this. And I biked home, and my parents weren't home, but the next day in school, when Sister Therese asked me, like, Debbie, did you choose a sponsor yet? I said, Sister Therese, I don't think there is a God. And I really thought she'd be excited by this. And I mentioned this last year because it's true, this is how this happened. In my head, when I was imagining it the night before, I imagined like she'd take this and say, whoa, I'm going to have to think about this. And the class would go on, but that night in the convent, they'd be like eating spaghetti dinner, all the nuns together, and they'd be discussing this, like, wow, she had this idea, this is so amazing. And then it would be too much for them, so they'd bring it to the priests, and the priests would have to discuss it. And then it would be this huge, huge thing, and of course that's not at all what happened. I was in 6th grade, I was very naive, and I got in trouble. I got a detention, which gave me some time to think about it. And she assigned me a sponsor, the school secretary, Sister Charles. Yeah, Sister Charles was mean. And I was upset, because now I was going to have to go through confirmation and be Catholic forever, and I didn't even believe in God. So I told my mom this, I don't want to get in trouble, but I don't know what to do. And my mom, who knew much more than I thought she did when I was in 6th grade, and was studying philosophy as part of nursing school, said, well, if you don't believe in God, then you're not making a promise to God to be Catholic forever, so just go through with it so you don't get in trouble. I hadn't thought of that, so I thought, well, yeah, you're right. So I did. I went through confirmation. I skipped the catechism. I missed that day of school. Went through the confirmation ceremony with Sister Charles at my shoulder. And when the bishop asked at the front, when we had to go up in line, do you believe in the one true Catholic God? I said, no. It was important to me to do so. But he was 89 and deaf and blessed me anyway. And so sent me on my merry way. However, the school secretary heard me, Sister Charles, and as she's death gripping my shoulder back to the pew, she says, we'll talk about this later. And I'm terrified of her, so I tried to avoid her office for a long time after that. And every time she called me down for something, I would try to, I would come in like, now I'm getting in trouble, and it would be for something else. 2 years later, 8th grade, I won a scholarship to a Catholic private all-girls school. The same school my older sister had won a scholarship to, and I couldn't go to the school unless I had a scholarship, and there was kind of the expectation that I might because my older sister did this. So I got this scholarship, and I was very proud. Everyone was congratulating me, and my head was swelled because I would live up to the expectations my older sister set. And I got called down to the office. And it's just 2 years later. I get called to the office, and Sister Charles says to me, I know that you don't go to church anymore, and I remember what you said at confirmation. I'm going to tell the nuns who run the other school, the Sisters of St. Joseph, same nuns, and they're going to take your scholarship away. And I said, no, I go to church. I just go to my local church. And, panic. And she says, bring me a letter from the priest. And I say, he never sees me, I sit in the back. And, and she glares at me, and so, I'm terrified now. And this is most partly through 8th grade. So after that, I started attending church every week. I take the bus up to this church, I sit there so I can be seen, so they won't take my scholarship away. And I hate it, and I'm bored, and I get to listen to these stories and just think about how really this seems less and less likely to be true. So when I get to high school, no bumps there, I started a philosophy club, a place where we could talk about these sorts of things, where we could ask these open questions. I had no idea anything about philosophy because I was a freshman in high school, and we mostly talked about Star Trek. One of my favorite topics, which we revisited multiple times, was if there's life on other planets like Klingons and Vulcans, do they have souls, and are they going to heaven and hell, or are they treated kind of like cats are in here? And we discussed the hell out of that. And sometimes I'd look up topics in the encyclopedia, because this is the old days. So like, what's the relationship between morality and legality? We have these big discussions once a week. Halfway through my sophomore year, in religion class, which was kind of hit or miss for me, I wrote a paper that ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back for them. We had to write a paper on a priestly person. And a priestly person is someone who takes Catholic values and ministers to the masses or a congregation the way a priest ministers to his congregation. So most people picked Mother Teresa, the Pope, Gandhi, a couple did Martin Luther King, their grandfather, and I did mine on Bob Dylan. And yeah, I justified it in 7 pages with a bibliography. It only had to be 4. And because I was huge into folk music and I play guitar, so I was being earnest about this. I said he was an agent of social change and that his songs influenced a generation. It made them become socially aware and conscious, and that it helped free Reuben Carter from prison because he wrote the song Hurricane about this unjust jailing, and that activated people to say, wait, this is unfair, and he was freed from prison. This is amazing. He's a priestly person. And so the day we get our papers back, I get called out of the room by Sister Mary Hummel, and standing in the hallway, she says, what is the meaning of this? And I say, he was an agent of social change. And she says, he was a rock musician. I say, that way he was able to get his message to more people. And she says, he was a Jew. I don't know why. She says, he was a Jew. And I said, well, Gandhi wasn't Catholic either, and neither was Martin Luther King. And she storms off down the hallway, brings it to the school disciplinarian. Everyone in the class heard me. I had to slink back in. My parents get a call. They go in the next day, and the school tells them that they're taking away my scholarship. And this is halfway through my sophomore year. You know, I'd had friends, all of these things. I could not go back in the fall. And the reasons they gave included the papers I wrote in religion class and the philosophy club, because they heard the discussions I had. The room we met in had the principal's office and the school disciplinarian's office and other people's offices right off of it, so they actually heard our conversations. And so they knew that I wasn't growing up to be a good young Catholic woman, which is what the scholarships were meant to foster. So they took my scholarship away. So I was a miserable sophomore for the rest of the year because I knew that I couldn't go to school with my friends, that I'd probably disappointed my parents, that all of these things. But I was also angry as hell, actually, about it. So when I started at public school in the fall, and my parents moved to the burbs that summer, so lucky me. I got to go to a suburban public school instead of my local one. When I started school that fall, I started a philosophy club again. But instead of focusing as much on fun things like Star Trek and Vulcans and cats and souls and limbo, we focused a lot more on academic freedom issues and secularism, church-state separation, free inquiry, atheism, critical examination of religion, because now these were topics I had a deep interest in. And what I did not know until later was that one of my friends from stage crew who joined my philosophy club, just for fun, ended up questioning her own beliefs and becoming an atheist. And it was big for her. A few years later, she was a student at the University of Pittsburgh. She had started a Campus Free Thought Alliance group. And she called me and said, hey, I'm going to this conference for about like students in secular humanism and free thought and stuff in Buffalo. I thought you'd like to go because of the philosophy club. And I said, what? About what? She's like, secular humanism. I said, what's secular humanism? I don't know that word, those words. And she said, well, basically, it's a student atheist convention. What, they meet? That's cool. Yeah, I'll go. I had no idea. This is the summer of 2000. I was in college. So I contact the Center for Inquiry, whatever that is. I have no idea what this stuff is. I'm thinking it's like 12 students at a VFW in Buffalo somewhere, because what's in Buffalo? I didn't know it. I'd never been to Buffalo before, so I talked to a coordinator here. He says, yeah, we do this. This sounds like something you should go to. We have travel grants. I get a $100 travel grant for a Greyhound bus ticket to go to Buffalo to I don't know what, and with my friend Danielle. So sure, okay, I take off from work, got on the Greyhound bus for an adventure, and I just actually a couple days ago, again, like reread the journal entry I wrote the day before I left, where I'm really like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Going to Buffalo, though. Secular humanism, I looked that up, not sure what that's about, and came here to CFI in 2000. This part of the building wasn't here yet. The front entrance was actually that narrow point where the doors are there. And I was blown away that there was a building and paid staff and books and like people working on this sort of thing. I had literally no idea. Like, I was shocked. And not only that, but there were about 35 student leaders at that event who all had groups on their campuses, who were all doing these crazy, enormous things that I didn't know I could even do. The group at Ohio State University, Students for Free Thought, was doing a campaign, I think the next year actually, where they challenged Campus Crusades' Do You Agree With campaign, where for 4 weeks in this big build-up, it's like, do you agree with Joe, or some name of some student? And you don't know what Joe actually thinks, but everyone starts saying, like, what is this? Do I agree with Joe? Who's Joe? And then the last week is this whole explosion. Joe loves Jesus. Joe's everything. But they found out that this campaign existed, and so they counter-campaigned with, I don't agree with Joe, and ran ads and sold T-shirts and all this sort of thing. And I was like, that is so cool. I had no idea. Here I was studying philosophy because I wanted to learn how I could promote critical thinking and free inquiry, no questions off limits. I was interested in academic freedom. I was doing all these progressive things, but I did not know that a movement like this existed. And it seemed so foundational to making change. I was involved in LGBTQ activism at the time, and a lot of times what you come up against is, no, God hates the gays. God doesn't like homosexuality. It's unnatural. It's sinful. We cannot accept that in our society. And so instead of talking about rights necessarily, you're talking about how much time you should spend listening to your pastor, your minister, what you think the Bible says. And I thought, if I can plug into this and promote critical thinking and promote naturalism and promote free inquiry, this will change the world. This is what will change people. And so the next year when I came back in 2001, I joined every group in the Philadelphia region, groups in New Jersey, groups in Central PA, a group in New York City, like anything that I could go to because I was so excited this existed. I came back, I knew what secular humanism was. When another student there was like, I don't really know what secular humanism is, I was like, let me tell you, because now I know, and I was where you were last year. And I started a group on my campus and had things that I could tell people about what my group was doing. And so that year, they did elections for the Student Executive Council, the Volunteer Executive Council. No one ran for Publications Director, and I wanted to get involved. And so because no one was running for that position, I volunteered. I didn't have to be elected. I wasn't running against someone. I said, yeah, I can do a monthly newsletter. I'm good at editing. And they said, sure. Here's what we expect. Basically a 22-page Word document every month of like news and events and articles and things. If I had known what I was going to be signing up for, I possibly would not have done it. But I had volunteered, got involved, started producing this beast of a newsletter. So my job was to find events that were going on at different campuses. So this was pretty sweet, because I got to contact groups and say, hey, what are you doing? That's cool. Would you like to write it up? Can you give me more information? I'll put it in the newsletter. I got to report on international news that was related to this movement. So I learned about all of these different issues everywhere. It forced me to know like what was going on in the world. And I realized, again, like just how important and how foundational what this movement does is. Yeah, let's just go. New things. Sorry, skip that. So this is, I wanted to highlight some other people that got involved around that time too. What I've seen them grow into, I guess, over time. People who started, like me, as students in this movement, but have had the opportunity to do more. But first, some other fun stuff I did. This is a conference I went to in 2001. I don't have one from 2000. And this is, if anyone knows the Infidel guy, he had a radio show for a long time. August Brunsman was here at the conference. There he is, over there. There's students from all over the place. I think about a fourth of them are with me. There's me in 2001. Another conference I attended. This one, I drove to Atlanta from Philadelphia, which was a 14-hour drive, for a CFI conference on science and reason. Are they compatible? Wait, science and religion, are they compatible? And that was the, I was like, that's not right. They are compatible. This was in the hotel room that we had for students, and it was the first time I met DJ Grothy, who ended up becoming the outreach director here for a while before moving on to working for JREF a few years ago. Building tour, 2001, when Ed Beck was the executive director of the Council for Secular Humanism. We'll be doing building tours, by the way, over the course of this, so you'll get to see where I was standing. There's me. This was cool. In 2002, there was the Godless Americans March on Washington. Like Reason Rally, it was something that I think American atheists first kind of proposed to a lot of people, and then a whole bunch of different organizations signed on to, and threw in speakers and helped promote it and threw in money. So it was this huge, multi-sponsored event, a rally in Washington, D.C. in 2002. And when I say huge at the time, just to show you how much the movement has grown, that drew 2,300 people. Best estimates that I've seen for the Reason Rally seem to be about 25,000 people. Right? So if I could do math, no. It's a huge increase in the last 10 years. In 2002, when I was working as a secretary somewhere where I couldn't be out, actually, about this sort of thing, I got profiled in BeliefNet as the student activist, which was really freaky because if you saw the other like 4 or 5 people that were profiled, they were like Hitchens types, and I was like, what am I doing on this list? But talking about the growth of the campus groups worldwide and my little chapter at Montgomery County Community College, where I was a student at the time. Derek Araujo, I mentioned, so Campus Free Thought Alliance started in 1996. He was the founding president. He created the Harvard Secular Society. He was an undergraduate student in physics at the time, ended up going on to Harvard Law, got involved with corporate law for a while, then decided to get back into nonprofit work. For a while, he was CFI's legal counsel, and also for a while, the executive director of CFI New York City, so he stuck around. He actually left to go back to school to get a PhD in physics at MIT, so he also plays a mean bass guitar. I don't think there's anything he can't do. I'm really intimidated by Derek Araujo. Yeah, right? Austin Dacey was a former coordinator of the Campus Free Thought Alliance. Now he's basically acting as a public intellectual. He wrote the book, The Secular Conscience, spoke here a few years ago. Now his recent book is on blasphemy. He's been talking a lot about free expression issues internationally. And I was not here for this event, and I did not make this picture, but this was Austin at a CFI event. He was apparently the DJ then when they had a superstition bash. Another person that came out of the campus movement that I mentioned, DJ Grothy, who's been kind of all over the blogosphere recently, started as a student group leader at Washington University, the Washington University League of Freethinkers, WOLF, and also interned here and volunteered. For a while, he was the host of Point of Inquiry, our radio show and podcast, and then left to become the president of the James Randi Educational Foundation. Another person that came out of the student movement is Chris Mooney. He'll be speaking here this weekend. I think he was involved with the leadership of the group at Yale University. He's currently the host of Point of Inquiry. He's a New York Times bestselling author and popular science blogger. It's funny, when I was cleaning out my the kind of campus archives, the old files, bunch of paperwork from the last 15 years, I was running across old press releases that he'd written in the late 90s for the Campus Free Thought Alliance, like, hey, Chris Mooney. That's cool. These are some of the books he's had as New York Times bestsellers. And I heard a story that, though he's not the one who told me it, that his experience with volunteering at CFI inspired him to write about science and culture, to realize just how ignorant the public is about how science works, and how important it is that we help inform people about this. And he's been doing that fantastically with these books. Justin Trottier is a former student group leader from Canada. For a while was the CFI Canada Executive Director, now serving as the National Communications Director. He founded the group at the University of Toronto, the Secular Alliance there. Someone else who came out of the student movement. If you know the Friendly Atheist, yeah? he interned here in 2003, which is how I first met him when I came to an event in the summer and was like, oh, nerdy interns, people to hang out with, lots of fun. I guess it was the year after that, maybe a year and a half after that, he did the I Sold My Soul on eBay, which was something he was involved with his campus group in Chicago, which was at the time called Students Without Religious Dogma, SWORD. He's now the chair of the Foundation Beyond Beliefs. So someone else who came out of the student movement who has a huge amount of impact there. August Brunsman is the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance now, was involved, I met him at the first conference I attended in 2000, was on the executive council here, and then president of Students for Free Thought at OSU. Jason Torpy interned also in 2000, was involved with the group at OSU, is now the director of the Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers. One of the things he's been working hard on is to get, all the issues with military chaplains and how evangelical they are. Austin Klein is someone I've never met. He was involved in person just before I came in the late 90s. And he's used the same picture since then. So and he made a Twitter feed, so I know that he chose to use this headshot for things, since it was his Twitter picture for a while. I think now it's something else. Former publicity coordinator for the Campus Free Thought Alliance. Now he's basically the guy behind the atheism section of About.com. Extremely, extremely prolific writer, like several articles a week all over the place. I don't know what it is he does with the rest of his time, except write. You know J.T. Eberhard. He started as a student group leader at Missouri State University, co-founded Skepticon, now working for the Secular Student Alliance as a high school specialist and blogger and speaker. Some more recent people I thought I'd mention. Steph Leroy. Steph, wave. And you're what, 24? She founded 4 student groups in New York City, bouncing around to different schools, was a camp counselor at Camp Inquiry, and somewhat recently, March, I believe, became the executive director of CFI New York City. And she's cool. She is. And actually, I was intimidated by her before I got to know her son. Now we're chill. Dren Asselmeyer started as a student group leader, also at Grand Valley State University, and then volunteered and interned for CFI Michigan doing volunteer management and campus outreach and all sorts of things. Now, like me, working at CFI Transnational, getting to continue doing this stuff, working with different student groups. So I actually presented a lot of these people last year, and I thought about this later, after I talked last year on this, about not just who I've met over the last 12 years and who I realized I was connected with in strange ways. We were sorts of graduates of the campus program in a way, in that we stayed involved after we left school, or we still help support local groups, we still help support campus groups. But there was a part of my experience as publications director that I found really inspiring that I didn't talk about much last year, and I thought I'd focus on more this year, the bit of time I have left. And it was mentioned a bit in the previous session, so I thought I'd expound on that some, because it's something I think about a lot, and I'd like to share it with you. I think some of you don't know some of these things that are going on, or we might have a surface idea, but I found it extremely inspiring. It was one of the reasons I plugged into this movement and this organization. And that's the international aspect of this. So I went to the Reason Rally, and I pay attention to a lot of the atheist news. Sometimes atheists, people involved in the atheist movement who represent atheism publicly, talk about why the values of our movement are good, why we're trying to promote the things we promote. And sometimes the language used is, it's in the Constitution. Secularism is in the Constitution. You know, America's not a Christian nation, and this is why we have to be atheists and promote secularism. But it seemed to me that whether or not it's in the Constitution, the reason that we want to promote these values is because they're good values for living together beyond just the American context. I mean, yay, American context too, right? And it certainly helps us when we're doing political advocacy. But these values went beyond that. And so this movement goes beyond that. And the reasons that this movement is important go beyond America's borders. And it's something that I didn't think about when I was getting involved, when I found out that there was a movement. The very kind of first times, the first conference I went to, I heard vague rumblings about international branches, about things happening internationally. But I was kind of wrapped up in my own world of knowing, going to Catholic school environment, not being able to ask questions in a school was wrong. And I needed to do something about that. The things I saw around me, the values, the fact that people wanted to create laws based on their understandings of the Bible, that is wrong, and I needed to do something about that. But there were bigger things going on, and different things in other areas, and that's something that I've learned a lot about over time. So I thought I'd focus on a few of the people, other young activists out there who are doing things, to let you know what's going on. First, Jason Ball. In my head, I call him a golden child because he's so shiny and cute. He should be a model. Jason Ball started the University of Melbourne Secular Society in Australia. And I only kind of recently heard his story. Apparently, in high school, he did an exchange program in Kansas from Australia. And it was there that he learned that creationists are a real thing. And he was terrified. And he thought, America is scary. And they have a lot of power. But then he went back to Australia and saw that even though some of these issues aren't as big or they're swept under the rug, they're there too. And not only that, but the reason that people were creationists, the reason that people were anti-evolution, that they were so religious, the family he stayed with in Kansas, the school he went to in Kansas, was because of this, supernatural perspective, this lack of critical thinking in a lot of ways, kind of accepting what you're given, not being able to question it. So he started the University of Melbourne Secular Society, and it went gangbusters. The biggest event I think he did with the group was organizing a massive protest that ended up drawing thousands of people in Melbourne to protest the Australian government putting millions and millions of dollars into the Pope coming for World Youth Day, I think they call it, in Melbourne. So he was the face of that, organized this whole counter effort, got a lot of attention, got a lot of press, got a lot of protesters out there. Since graduating a couple years ago, he's become the PR director for the Atheist Foundation of Australia. He's created a network for campus groups in Australia called the Free Thought Student Alliance, and he was the director of marketing for the Global Atheist Convention that just happened in April, which ended up being so far the largest atheist convention in the world, with 4,000 people. TAM, I think, drew 1,600 last year. Skepticon, 15 something. This is bigger. This was bigger than that, and he was the face of it. And he's only 24, or maybe 5 now. And he was on TV, and he was on the radio, and he spoke in front of the crowd there. He was organized as hell. I got the chance to go to that convention. He invited me, which was kind of interesting because back in 2009, we had a conference in Bethesda, Maryland for CFI, and because of his work with the University of Melbourne Secular Society and also an offered sponsorship, we brought him in for that, for a panel that we moderated on student activism at that conference, which was the first time I met him. So he's another one doing what he's doing in Australia. The last set of people are kind of an overlocking set. I mentioned I was on the publications, I was the publications director, so that I was responsible for producing this monthly newsletter, and contacted groups about what they were doing to find interesting stories that they could write about to contribute to the newsletter. Well, I found then that there was a network of campus groups in Africa. I think there were 3 at the time in Nigeria, and I randomly emailed one of them and said, hello, my name is Debbie Goddard, I'm publications director, and I'm starting a newsletter. And I wondered what you guys are up to, if you'd like to write an article for one of my future newsletters. And I got an email back from someone named Yemi, Ademoyo Adeyemi Johnson. And he says, "Hi, wow, that's so cool that you're interested in what we're doing. Yeah, we actually have this anti-superstition event coming up to stop people from killing children who are accused of witchcraft and educate them about that. And we're doing it on campus. We're inviting a lot of community people because this is a safe space for us to have these events, because otherwise, you know, oftentimes we'll get attacked by the Christians here, like physically assaulted, attacked by the Christians here who will come in and try to interrupt our events, but we can do it on campus. And so we're going to launch this whole anti-superstition campaign for about a year after that. I'm happy to write an article about that. Oh, it's so cool that you're interested in what we're doing. So what are some of the big issues going on in America right now?" And I was like, "We're working really hard to get under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance, man. It's terrible." No, I didn't say that, but we were actually doing that at the time. Michael Newdow's case was getting big. And my brother, and it's not that that's totally trivial. My brother got suspended from school for not standing for the pledge and for not saying under God in the pledge, and I got in trouble myself for it. It's just that I had never thought about that level, that sort of impact that this movement could have, of stopping people from killing children who are accused of witchcraft. I'd never thought about that. And I never thought that someone who was my age, a student leader, 21 years old, in this other country, could actually have a hand in educating the public about this sort of thing. It blew my mind. And he actually did write articles for the newsletter. I'll get back to that in 1 second, though. I'll share some more information about him. So, speaking of international outreach, last year, I was fortunate enough to go to the World Humanist Congress in Oslo, Norway. We had to send a representative from these organizations, from actually the Council for Secular Humanism, and it was decided a few weeks before that I would go, which was awesome. I'd never been to Europe or anything like that before, and I was honored to go. Unfortunately, it coincided with me moving, so I was also stressed as crap because I had very little time to figure all of these different things out and move my stuff from one apartment into another one. So I wasn't really paying attention to stuff except the basics. Let's get my flight booked, let's get my hotel booked, let's buy my ticket, let's figure out, like, print out a map and all of these sorts of things. Cool. I didn't really chill about it because I had to finish moving like 2 days before I was getting on a plane for a week. I didn't really think about how awesome this was until I was on the plane flying to Norway. And I got to participate in a couple days of leadership training with representatives from around the world. I think in this picture we have, he was from Chile, and he was from, where is he from? India, America, Belgium, Uganda, and some other places. And that's Roar Janssen, who is in charge of the Norwegian Humanist Association. So I got to meet activists from around the world. I was surprised at how young many of them were. I was also surprised because this was August of last summer, and I vaguely knew that there had been a terrorist attack in Norway. But I hadn't really processed it until I basically posted on Facebook, "Hey, I'm going to Oslo tomorrow," and someone said, "Oh, be careful of terrorists." And I was like, oh, that's something that happened somewhere that I didn't really have time to look up. And I didn't realize until I was there that the Congress Center, it's called, the facility where the conference was being held, was like a block and a half away from the bomb blast downtown that happened 2.5 weeks earlier. So I took this photo in the plaza that the Congress Center faced. So this was like the clock tower. The bomb blast happened on the other side of this, in front of this building, which is covered basically by a giant white sheet with the missing windows at the top, the plywood you see. See all the missing windows over here? The clock face is broken. The Congress Center was on the other side of this plaza, and you might have seen, if you paid attention to the news, they used this fountain with flowers in it and everything like that, which was an interesting juxtaposition because the theme of the World Congress was humanism and peace. This was a zoomed up thing of the clock face, which was broken by the impact, some of the broken windows that they had plywooded up by then, and the building that was most damaged in the blast. And on the other side of the plaza, the World Humanist Congress. Looking up the street from the World Humanist Congress, the humanism symbol on the flags outside, you can see this building was right across from the bomb blast. And I had no idea of this until I got there. Looking down the street again, humanism and peace juxtaposed with what bad thinking can bring people to do. That became a major theme of the conference, of course. I got to spend time with a lot of young people there from the International Humanist and Ethical Youth Organization, which CFI on campus has worked with in the past. This is one of our main meeting rooms, and I took this because this window is shattered from the blast. And again, it's something I didn't process. I was sitting there and just like, why is that window all sparkly? Oh, right. Something terrible happened here a short time ago. The one day there were presentations, one of the leaders from Germany, who actually, weirdly, again, I'd been in touch with in 2001 to write articles for the campus newsletter when she was a student group leader. She wrote a play for people to perform about peace, and one of the windows was blown out of that room too. And the people on this panel are from Nepal, Germany, I think he's from Nepal, Belgium, and Pakistan, which was, again, cool. At this conference, I also got to meet Yemi in person from 11 years ago, 10 years ago when I first had emailed him, which was a bit of a surprise, like, oh my gosh, you are a person. You are no longer this strange email that I get messages from the other side of the world. And I talked to him about some of his recent activities. He's working on his PhD at the University of Ibadan, where he ran the group before. He shared with me in an email later some of the clippings of stuff that's been going on. Man plucks 10-year-old boy's eyes for rituals. Why some Nigerians carry out ritual killings, and the like. So his big program now, and he's I think 32 or 3, maybe 32, is this: Hawk Africa, stop stigmatizing children as witches. He actually gave me a polo shirt in a garish color, so I haven't worn it yet. He organizes seminars and workshops, bringing together different leaders, networking different organizations, as part of the Young Humanistas Network. So I took some pictures from that. One of the other efforts he's doing is building schools and orphanages for children who are kicked out, who are accused of witchcraft, so they have a safe space to go. He sent me this picture after I met him in person last year, and he said basically they organized a workshop, and strangely, not too far down the road when they were going out for food, they found an orphaned kid who had been kicked out after being abused and assaulted because his mother fell ill and his father thought that it was witchcraft. So they took him in and brought him to one of their schools. Sorry, that was quick. Schools. There's a school. And this was us hanging out in that square in Oslo with 2 activists from Nepal. Another person I'd met who I'd only had a kind of passing association with in the last few years was Betty Nasaka. She's from Uganda. She founded the Ugandan Humanist Effort to Save Women. Non-governmental organization established in Uganda while oriented towards achieving humanistic values. It is non-political, non-denominational, non-racial, voluntary organization. The mission: to promote humanistic values of human rights, social welfare, and scientific rationalism among vulnerable groups of young women. Most of the young women they work with are former prostitutes who are looking for something different that they can do. So that's their website. So they give them job training, and they do this on like shoestring budget, by the way. Learning how to use computers. This is hair braiding, she said, so that they can become hairdressers, so they can be self-sufficient financially. Sewing, clothing making, education classes, basically high school education levels. One other person I met there who was friends with Betty is an activist named Deo Sekituleko, who I think is in his late 20s now, has been involved with this stuff for about 8 years. And he invited me, and you don't know that I'm on this laptop right now, on that laptop there. he invited me to talk to people at their conference for the Ugandan Humanist Association, because they were just floored that someone from America gave a damn about them and would talk to them at a conference, which meant that I was up at my computer at 1:30 in the morning doing a Skype video call, asking them what they were doing, telling them about what we were doing, talking about African Americans for humanism, wondering if there were ways that we could cooperate in the future, which was totally freaking cool. I never imagined when I got involved with this that I could be on a Skype call around the world in Uganda that they'd even care about what I'd have to say. Just blows my mind. Another activist who's involved with student outreach and is a younger fellow is George Ongare. He's the executive director of CFI Kenya. He created this manual. He actually took this photo to show us because it's basically a campus organizing guide for campus groups. He works with 3 different groups in Kenya, one at the University of Nairobi, one at the University of Kenya, and one at, I think it's Moi, M-O-I University. He organized a trip a couple years ago for students to the Nairobi National Museum to talk about evolution and science education, how they can promote science over some other different ways of thinking. Took a photo with people. This is the University of Nairobi Humanists and Freethinkers, which is a campus affiliate doing a lot of different things there. I had only a couple more people I wanted to tell you about in this. One is Sanal Edamaruku, who I've never met but have communicated with online. I bring him up because one of the other interesting places I think that we get a lot of news from is India. And do you know what he's been in the news about recently? The statue, I think it was a Jesus statue that seemed to be weeping, and people were, they were drinking the water that was coming off of it and praying and collecting around it, and he investigated it and found that this was actually sewage water that was in the statue and then coming out again. So he said so. And the Catholic Church said, blasphemy, let us punish this man. I think right now he's in Finland so that he wasn't imprisoned with the chance of no bail, but he's happy to go to prison and go to court over this. It's not the first kind of superstition he's challenged in India. There was a video that was pretty popular, made the rounds a bit ago, where he challenged a god man who said that he could kill people with his chanting and his machinations. So Sanal went on TV with him for a length of time while the fellow danced around him trying to kill him with his mind. And it was so popular that it actually pushed off other programming while he stood there and laughed, and the guy did all of these things around him, trying harder and harder to kill him with his mind. And this was widely watched on Indian TV. And you can find the video on YouTube. It's pretty interesting. But strange as that seems, it's an interesting technique for outreach, because a lot of the issues that people are dealing with in India and in Africa have to do with education and skepticism and humanism, and not just atheism, which was something else that I learned coming to CFI and coming to conferences and seeing what different groups were doing, that it wasn't just about a lack of belief in God. It was, why we should even care about this sort of thing. Why is it important for us to talk to people about religion, or question religion, or fight for secularism in the public sphere, or try to promote critical thinking or science, or naturalism? And this might be a pretty goofy example, and some of the stuff that the skeptic side does isn't as interesting to hardcore atheists, and some of the hardcore atheists who spend lots and lots of time studying the Bible isn't as interesting to some other people who don't find that stuff very gripping. But when you think about the stuff that people are engaging in that these beliefs drive them to do in places like Nigeria and India, I think you can understand why this mission is so important. One other thing that Sanal Edamaruku did is fighting this godman who took money from peasant villagers to stand on their infant children, saying that it would bring them luck and health. And he challenged that, and the fellow ended up getting arrested finally. Someone I did meet, who's another fellow who's been doing this for about, actually a really long time, even though he's also just in his late 20s, is Abhilash. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Another Indian, works with the Atheist Center there, gives presentations, talks a lot. Here he is teaching some of the Germans at the conference in Oslo last year. Talks a lot about social justice issues and atheism, even though his place is called the Atheist Center, and people could quibble and say, oh, it's atheist, all that means is you don't believe in God. What it really is promoting a kind of humanism. He says, right from its inception, Atheist Center adopted a comprehensive approach for sustainable development, because it figures if people are poor, if they're poverty-stricken, they don't have many options. They certainly can't choose to go to school and educate themselves about this. So advancing the atheist agenda where he is means teaching people and helping them get out of poverty. Viewed life as an integrated whole and is striving to build an alternate way of life. Active association with the freedom struggle and its grassroots level work for the eradication of untouchability, case to other parochial considerations. Working a lot with villagers. One activity they did that I found interesting is training magicians. They bring in magicians to the Atheist Center, and they train them on how to do these workshops. And the magicians go out to different villages, and they teach people how these magic tricks are done. So that when godmen come to the villages and say, look, I have special powers, I can do these things that you can't explain, even people like Sai Baba, who was wealthy as hell from basically doing parlor tricks, generating bracelets and necklaces out of thin air, they can say, I know that that's just a magic trick. And this when they were teaching school children. It's about an article about teaching school children these magic tricks so that they don't get deceived when these kind of psychic peddlers come along. So two more I'll talk to you about. This is Gulalai Ismail. She's in Pakistan, 25 years old. She runs an organization called Aware Girls, a young women-led organization working for women empowerment, gender equality, and peace in Pakistan. We're working to strengthen the leadership capacity of young women, enabling them to act as agents of social change, like Bob Dylan, right? And women empowerment in their communities. Yeah, it's funny, the shifting of the lens. One recent workshop that she ran was on HIV and STD awareness, which is not education that most young women and girls get in Pakistan. She founded this effort a couple of years ago, is now only 25 years old. And the last one, which I include kind of just as a personal, I guess these are all personal notes in some way, but it was an interesting one for me. As I started sinking my teeth into some of this more, I'd volunteered on the publications committee, I'd read some of these articles, I saw the news stories. Eventually, because I didn't go away, and I stuck around doing lots of stuff all over the place, CFI hired me, which was awesome. I got hired and started here in 2006 to work with campus and community groups, which is what I'd been doing as a volunteer for 5 years. One of the first things I was assigned to do was to help make vinyl banners for the branches that just basically like Center for Inquiry, community of blah, 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 with our mission statement and website. The fellow who runs CFI India in Ayanaraseti happened to be in town that week. And so as I was like researching prices for vinyl banners and things and getting correct spellings and websites down, I thought, hey, why don't we make a banner for CFI India? And DJ, my boss, said, hey, that's a great idea, sure, why not ask Anai if that's fine, find out his mailing address. So I did make a vinyl banner for India, and I mailed it out to them. Several months later, Taslima Nasreen, did she speak at Reason Rally this year? Yeah, so a lot of you are familiar with her. She's a Bangladeshi author, writes a lot about Islam and women. She does poetry. She blogs for Free Thought Blogs. I almost forgot. Pretty awesome person in a lot of ways. Was giving a talk in Hyderabad, I believe in India, for CFI, and was attacked by angry Muslim protesters. And so these pictures popped up on CNN and in different areas. And this is Anaya Naraseti, who runs CFI India in the background. So I'm seeing these pictures pop up, Center for Inquiry, and all of this. And I said, well, hot damn, that's the banner that I had made for them. Holy cow, and that's a chair that's about to fly towards them, by the way, and Anaya's protecting Taslima Nasreen from it. I couldn't believe that I had the chance to be involved in this effort. From my weird little efforts in Catholic school and starting philosophy clubs in high school, and then getting involved because of an accident kind of with my friend who I didn't realize I inspired or even affected in any way when she went off and created this group at Pitt, and therefore impacted other people, then invited me to this leadership conference, which of course had a huge impact on me. You know, I had no idea that that sort of thing could spring from my seemingly small efforts, trying to kind of stick it to the man, but also wanting an open space for discussion and questions and things. And looking back, I've seen other people who just happen to fall into leadership positions or were interested in this sort of thing, who now have a huge impact. Even just people like the Friendly Atheist and what he does, how he writes, who he's able to reach and influence with his opinions on things, with his news articles, was something I could not have anticipated. And there are young people, this is from the IHEYO, the International Humanist and Ethical Youth Organization, and there are young people all over the world involved in these efforts of education, of promoting humanism, of promoting skepticism and atheism, you know,